The stranger in the shadows. Ethan adjusted his glasses as he worked late into the night in his small lab. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional sound of his pen scratching paper. He was repairing an old toy, a robot he had promised to fix for a neighbor's child. The boy had been heartbroken when it broke, and Ethan, with his kind heart, couldn't say no. The warm yellow light of the desk lamp created a cozy glow, but outside the lab, the world was dark and still, or so Ethan thought. Unbeknownst to him, someone was watching. Zavera stood silently in the shadows, her form hidden by a sleek cloaking device. She wasn't human. Her luminous green eyes were fixed on Ethan as he worked, her breathing slow and steady. Zavera was a highly trained operative from a distant planet, sent to Earth for a critical mission. Her task was simple: retrieve a powerful human technology that could disrupt the delicate balance of her people's survival. But there was a catch. The device was in Ethan's possession, and Zavera's orders were clear: neutralize any threat, including him. Her grip tightened on the small weapon in her hand, a sleek alien device designed for silent precision. She had completed countless missions before, all with the same outcome. She was the best at what she did. Yet, something about this mission felt different. As she watched Ethan through the lab's glass window, she noticed the way he gently handled the toy, his fingers careful and precise. He didn't look like a dangerous man. He wasn't a soldier or a scientist working on weapons. He looked ordinary, kind, even. Zavera frowned. Her people had described humans as greedy, violent, and unworthy of trust. But Ethan didn't seem to fit that description. A sudden noise broke her thoughts, a soft clink as Ethan accidentally knocked over a small screwdriver. He sighed, picked it up, and stretched his neck, rubbing his shoulder. Zavera could see the exhaustion on his face. She noticed something else too: the faint tune he was humming under his breath. It was a lullaby. Zavera tilted her head, her sharp hearing picking up the gentle melody. It was soothing, almost hypnotic. For a moment, she let herself feel the emotion behind it, a warmth she couldn't quite name. She blinked, startled by her own reaction. No distractions, she whispered to herself in her native tongue. But the hesitation lingered. She thought of the countless missions before this one, where targets had been eliminated without a second thought. Why was this human different? Ethan stood up, stretching his arms, and walked to the window. Zavera froze, her heart racing as his eyes scanned the darkness outside. She held her breath, her cloaking device hiding her from view. He stood there for a moment, his gaze distant, as if sensing something but unsure of what it was. "Just my imagination," Ethan muttered and returned to his work. Zavera exhaled softly, her heart still pounding. She gripped her weapon tighter, reminding herself of her mission. Yet, as she looked at Ethan again, something inside her shifted. She thought of her commander's words: humans are selfish creatures. They'll destroy themselves and take others with them. Show no mercy. But Ethan didn't look like someone who wanted to destroy. He looked like someone trying to fix, to help, to care. Her communicator buzzed softly in her ear, a voice speaking in her language. "Zavera, report. Have you secured the target?" She hesitated before responding. "Not yet. The human. He's not what I expected." "Your mission is clear. No delays." The voice snapped, and the line went silent. Zavera lowered her weapon slightly, her mind swirling with doubt. She had never questioned her orders before, but now, as she stood in the shadows, watching the man who hummed lullabies and fixed toys for children, she felt something she had never felt before: curiosity. For the first time in her life, Zavera wondered if her people had been wrong. The night deepened, and the lad grew quieter. Ethan yawned and leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy with sleep. Zavera stayed where she was, torn between her duty and the strange pull she felt toward this human. Her mission was simple, but her heart, it seemed, had other plans. An unexpected encounter. The following morning, Ethan stood in the doorway of his lab, sipping coffee and gazing at the small garden outside. He loved this quiet ritual of the early hours, a moment of calm before the world demanded his attention. But something felt different today, a sense of unease he couldn't shake off, as if the shadows from last night had followed him into daylight. As he turned to go back inside, a soft, melodic voice startled him. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Ethan Carter?" He turned sharply, almost spilling his coffee. Standing just outside the garden fence was a woman, tall, with strikingly bright green eyes and a presence that was hard to ignore. She was dressed in simple clothes, but there was something otherworldly about her poise. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied cautiously, his voice steady despite the odd sense that there was more to this woman than met the eye. "And you are?" "My name is Zara," she said smoothly, adapting her alias with practiced ease. "I'm a researcher visiting from, let's say, a faraway place. I've heard of your expertise in advanced technology, and I was hoping you could help me." Ethan studied her, unsure of what to make of her unusual request. Few people sought him out in person for work. It was mostly emails and calls from companies. But this woman was different. There was a strange intensity in her gaze, as if she was studying him just as much as he was her. "What kind of help are you looking for?" he asked, opening the gate and gesturing for her to come closer. Zavara, or Zara, as she called herself, hesitated for the briefest moment. She stepped forward, her movements fluid, almost too graceful. Inwardly, her mind raced. She needed an excuse to get closer to him, to analyze the technology she knew he was hiding in this lab. "I've been working on a prototype energy converter," she began, weaving a half-truth into her story. "But it's unstable, and I believe you've developed something that could stabilize it. I've read about your work. Your inventions are remarkable." The flattery wasn't lost on Ethan, though it felt more like a calculated compliment than genuine admiration. Still, his curiosity piqued. "Energy converter, huh?" he said, leaning against the doorway. "Well, I've dabbled in similar fields. Do you have any schematics or data I can look at?" Zavara's mind raced. She had no schematics to show him, but she couldn't afford to lose his trust this early. "Not with me," she said quickly, "but I could explain it. Perhaps you could give me a brief tour of your lab first. It would help me understand your work better." Ethan hesitated. He rarely allowed strangers into his workspace, and something about this woman's request set off alarms in his head. But her expression, calm and patient, convinced him to give her the benefit of the doubt. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "But no touching anything without asking first." Zavara smiled faintly. "Understood." As they entered the lab, Zavara's keen eyes scanned every detail. Her advanced senses picked up faint energy signatures, her internal systems logging data on the fly. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, where observation and deception were her strongest weapons. Ethan began explaining his work, showing her devices and prototypes. He spoke with passion, his love for innovation evident in every word. For a moment, Zavara found herself distracted, not by the technology, but by him. His sincerity was disarming, unlike anything she had encountered among her own kind. "So," Ethan said, turning to her, "what exactly do you need this energy converter for?" Zavara faltered. She had rehearsed her response, but his direct gaze made her stumble. "It's for an energy crisis back home. Our systems are failing, and we need a solution fast." Her answer was vague, but Ethan didn't press further. He sensed she was hiding something, yet her voice carried a weight of truth that he couldn't ignore. As they talked, Zavara began to notice small details, how Ethan's eyes lit up when he explained a breakthrough, how his hands moved with purpose and care. This man wasn't just a scientist. He was someone who genuinely cared about solving problems, not for profit, but for the greater good. For the first time since she had arrived on Earth, Zavara felt doubt creeping in. Her mission required her to retrieve the technology by any means necessary, but how could she betray someone like this? "Zara," Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Yes," she replied, startled. "You seemed lost in thought. Everything okay?" She forced a smile. "Just impressed. Your work is beyond anything I've ever seen." Ethan chuckled. "It's not perfect, but I try." As the tour ended, Ethan walked her to the door. "If you decide to share those schematics, feel free to reach out," he said, handing her his business card. Zavera took it, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, a feeling she couldn't quite describe. "Thank you, Dr. Carter," she said softly. "Call me Ethan," he replied with a grin. As Zavera walked away, her communicator buzzed in her ear. It was her commander. "Progress," the voice demanded. Zavera hesitated, her eyes lingering on the lab behind her. "I've made contact," she said. "The human. He's different." "Different how?" Zavera didn't answer. She disconnected the call, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she wondered if following orders was truly the right thing to do. The truth revealed. The sun had set, and Ethan was back in his lab, tinkering with a device he'd been perfecting for months. The day's unusual encounter with Zara lingered in his mind. Her striking green eyes and the way she spoke about energy converters felt both intriguing and suspicious. Something about her didn't add up. Ethan tried to shake it off, chalking it up to overthinking, but his instincts told him otherwise. He locked the lab door that evening, a habit he rarely bothered with, and set his devices to alert mode, just in case. Meanwhile, Zavera stood at a safe distance from the lab, her cloaking device active. She could see Ethan through the glass, his face illuminated by the soft blue glow of his screens. Her mission was at a critical juncture. She had to retrieve the device her people needed tonight. But something held her back. Her communicator buzzed again, and her commander's voice came through, cold and demanding. "Zavera, enough delays. You have one task: secure the energy core and eliminate the human if necessary. Do not fail us." Zavera hesitated before responding, her voice quieter than usual. "The human is cooperative. I believe we can retrieve the core without violence." "Cooperative?" The commander's tone was sharp. "Humans are deceptive and selfish. Do not be fooled by their behavior. Carry out your orders or face the consequences." The line went silent, leaving Zavera alone with her thoughts. She had always trusted her people's judgment, but Ethan's actions didn't align with what she'd been told. He didn't seem selfish or dangerous. On the contrary, he seemed kind. Her heart wavered, but duty pushed her forward. She adjusted her cloaking device and entered the lab silently, her movements swift and precise. She needed to find the energy core quickly before her hesitation got the better of her. Inside, Ethan was engrossed in his work, oblivious to the figure moving behind him. Zavera scanned the room with her advanced sensors, locating the core on a shelf nearby. She moved toward it, but as her hand reached out, a small alarm beeped, a tripwire Ethan had set. Startled, Zavera's cloaking device flickered for a moment, revealing her shimmering alien form. Ethan spun around, his eyes widening in shock. He grabbed a makeshift weapon, a heavy wrench, and pointed it at her, his voice shaking. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he demanded. Zavera froze, her mind racing. She could disable him easily, but something about his fear and confusion made her pause. Slowly, she deactivated her cloaking device, revealing her true appearance. Her tall, ethereal figure glowed faintly under the lab's lights, her emerald eyes locked on Ethan. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said softly, lowering her hands in a gesture of peace. Ethan stared at her, trying to process what he was seeing. "You're not human." "No," she admitted. "I'm Zavera from the planet Calith. I was sent here to retrieve the energy core you've developed. My people needed to survive." "The energy core?" Ethan asked, his grip on the wrench tightening. "What do you mean?" "It's just a prototype. It's not even fully functional." Zavera stepped closer, her voice urgent. To you, it's a prototype. To us, it's a solution. Your technology emits a unique frequency. It could stabilize our dying energy systems. Without it, my planet faces collapse." Ethan hesitated, his fear giving way to curiosity. "If that's true, why didn't you just ask for my help? Why sneak around?" "Because my orders were to secure it at all costs," Zavera admitted, her voice laced with regret, "including eliminating any threats." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Threats? You mean me?" Zavera nodded slowly. "Yes, but I don't want to hurt you, Ethan. I've seen enough to know you're not the monster my people believe humans to be." Ethan lowered the wrench slightly, still cautious. "Then why are you telling me this? Isn't your mission more important than my life?" Zavera looked away, her expression conflicted. "It was, until I met you. You've shown me something I never expected: compassion. You're not the enemy I was trained to destroy. You're different." The room fell silent as the weight of her words hung in the air. Ethan's mind raced with questions. Could he trust her? Was she genuine, or was this some elaborate ploy? "Let me help you," he said finally, surprising himself. "If your people are in trouble, we can find a solution together. But you have to be honest with me." Zavera's eyes widened in disbelief. "You'd help me, even after everything I've done?" Ethan nodded. "If what you're saying is true, then we have a chance to save lives. But I need to know I can trust you." Before Zavera could respond, a loud crash shattered the moment. The lab door burst open, and two heavily armed figures entered. Caliph operatives sent to ensure Zavera's mission succeeded. "Zavera," one of them barked. "Stand down. We'll handle this." Ethan stepped in front of Zavera instinctively, his voice firm. "She's not your enemy. And neither am I." The operatives raised their weapons, their cold eyes fixed on Ethan. Zavera's heart pounded as she realized the truth. Her people wouldn't stop until they completed the mission, no matter the cost. A heartfelt choice. The tension in the lab was suffocating. Zavera stood between Ethan and her own people, her tall, luminous form glowing faintly in the dim light. The two operatives had their weapons trained on Ethan, their faces emotionless, and their stances unwavering. "Step aside, Zavera," one of them growled, his voice cold. "You've disobeyed direct orders. Don't make this worse." Zavera's emerald eyes narrowed. "I won't let you harm him. This isn't right." The second operative sneered. "You're compromised. Humans are manipulative creatures. They'll tell you anything to save themselves. Complete the mission or face the consequences." Ethan, standing frozen behind Zavera, felt a pang of guilt. He had no idea what he had stumbled into or why this strange energy core he'd been developing was so important. But one thing was clear. Zavera was risking her life for him. "You don't have to do this," Ethan whispered to her. Zavera glanced back at him, her expression softening. "Yes, I do." Turning to the operatives, she raised her voice, her words firm and unyielding. "I've spent weeks observing humans, and they're not what we've been told. They're not perfect, but they're not the enemy either. Ethan has offered to help us, willingly. There's no need for violence." The first operative scoffed. "Help? From a human? Don't be naive. They'll exploit our weakness the moment they know it exists." Zavera clenched her fists, her frustration evident. "You think violence is the only way to survive, but it's not. If we take this path, we'll lose more than just resources. We'll lose who we are." Ethan could feel the desperation in her voice. He stepped forward, careful not to provoke the operatives. "Look, I don't know what kind of situation your people are in, but if this technology can help, let me work with you. I've spent years on it. It's not just a device, it's a part of me. I won't let it be used for destruction." The room fell silent. The operatives exchanged a glance, their resolve faltering for a moment. "You're wasting time, Zavera," the first operative said finally, his tone less confident. "The Council won't tolerate insubordination." Zavera straightened her posture, her voice clear and unwavering. "Then let them come for me. But I won't let you take his life. If that makes me a traitor, so be it." The second operative sighed, lowering his weapon slightly. "You're choosing this human over your mission, over your people." Zavara nodded. "I'm choosing what's right." Ethan, feeling the weight of her words, stepped beside her. "If you trust me, we can solve this together. But you'll have to take a leap of faith, just like she did." The operatives hesitated, their training at odds with the unexpected turn of events. Finally, the first operative lowered his weapon completely, though his expression remained tense. "This isn't over," he warned. "We'll report this to the council. You're on your own now, Zavara." With that, the two operatives retreated, disappearing into the night. The lab was silent once more, the tension replaced by a heavy, uncertain calm. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. That could have gone worse. Zavara turned to him, her gaze filled with gratitude and worry. "You didn't have to stand up for me. They could have killed you." Ethan shrugged, trying to mask his lingering fear. "You stood up for me first. It's only fair." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their choices hanging in the air. Zavara finally broke the silence. "I've betrayed my people. They won't stop hunting me. Or you." "Then we'd better figure this out fast," Ethan said, his tone resolute. He gestured to the core on the shelf. "If this can save your planet, we'll make it work. But you'll have to teach me everything you know about your people's technology." Zavara smiled faintly, her fear giving way to determination. "You're willing to risk everything for this?" Ethan met her gaze. "If it means saving lives, yours, your people's, and maybe even ours, then it's worth the risk." Zavara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and admiration. For the first time in her life, she felt hope, not just for her mission, but for the possibility of something greater. The final stand. The lab's lights flickered faintly as Ethan and Zavara worked side by side, their focus fixed on the energy core. Zavara had explained its intricate properties, her voice steady yet tinged with urgency. Ethan was fascinated by its complexity. It was far more advanced than anything he'd ever encountered. "This core," she said, pointing to the shimmering sphere, "is designed to harness energy from quantum fluctuations. On my planet, our systems have degraded to the point where we can't stabilize the flux. But your design uses an ingenious algorithm to counteract the chaos." Ethan smiled faintly, though the weight of the situation dampened his pride. "I never imagined it could save a planet. I just wanted to create something efficient for renewable energy." Zavara looked at him, admiration flickering in her emerald eyes. "You don't realize how extraordinary your mind is, Ethan." Before he could respond, a faint hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Zavara's head snapped toward the window. Her advanced hearing picked up the unmistakable sound of Caliph ships approaching. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with dread. Ethan turned to the window, but all he could see was darkness. "How many?" Zavara closed her eyes for a moment, focusing. "2 scout ships. Each carries a strike team of 4 operatives. They won't negotiate this time." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What do we do?" Zavara stepped toward him, her expression resolute. "We can't fight them head-on. They're too strong. But if we can complete the core's stabilization, we might be able to overload their systems and force them to retreat." Ethan nodded, his hands already moving to adjust the core's parameters. "What do you need me to do?" Zavara quickly explained the sequence of modifications required. "But there's a risk," she added, her voice hesitant. "If the overload isn't controlled perfectly, it could destroy the core, and us with it." Ethan met her gaze, his determination unwavering. "We don't have a choice. Let's do this." As they worked, the hum of the ships grew louder, and moments later, bright beams of light cut through the darkness outside the lab. The strike teams descended, their weapons glinting ominously in the moonlight. The lab door shuddered as the first operative tried to force it open. Ethan glanced at Zavara, panic creeping into his voice. "They're going to break in." Zavara activated her personal shield, a faint shimmer enveloping her body. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. You finish the modifications." "No," Ethan said firmly. "We do this together." Zavara hesitated, her resolve softening. "Ethan, you're brave, but this is beyond you. Let me protect you." "You already have," he replied, his voice steady. "Now let me return the favor." The door burst open, and the first operatives stormed in, their weapons raised. Zavara moved like a blur, her advanced reflexes allowing her to disarm two of them before they could fire. Ethan ducked behind a workbench, his hands trembling but determined as he continued to adjust the core. One of the operatives managed to get a shot off, the energy blast searing past Zavara and striking a piece of equipment near Ethan. Sparks flew, and Ethan yelped, narrowly avoiding the debris. "Ethan, focus!" Zavara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm trying." He yelled back, his fingers flying over the controls. Zavara fought with precision and grace, but the operatives were relentless. One managed to land a hit on her shield, causing it to flicker. She winced, the strain evident on her face. "Zavara." Ethan called out, his voice laced with fear. "I'm fine," she replied through gritted teeth. "Just keep going." Ethan made the final adjustment, his heart pounding. "It's ready," he shouted. Zavara disengaged from the fight and rushed to his side. "Activate it now." Ethan pressed the activation switch, and the energy core began to glow, its light intensifying with each passing second. A low hum filled the room, growing into a deafening roar. The operatives froze, their eyes widening in realization. "What have you done?" one of them shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. Zavara stepped forward, her voice cold. "You wanted the core. Now you'll see its true power." The core unleashed a burst of energy, a brilliant wave of light that spread outward, disrupting the operatives' weapons and disabling their communication devices. The Caliph ships outside flickered and powered down, their systems overloaded. Ethan and Zavara shielded their eyes as the light faded, leaving the room eerily silent. The operatives lay unconscious, their suits sparking faintly. Ethan exhaled, his hands shaking. Did it work? Zavara scanned the area, her advanced senses confirming the threat had been neutralized. "For now," she said, her voice calm but cautious. Ethan slumped against the workbench, his exhaustion catching up with him. That was intense. Zavara knelt beside him, her expression softening. "You were incredible, Ethan. I couldn't have done this without you." He managed a weak smile. "I think I'm getting the hang of saving planets." Love's sacrifice. The faint beep from the core echoed ominously in the lab, breaking the fragile silence. Zavara's sharp senses instantly recognized the signal, a distress beacon activated by the core's overload. Her heart sank as she realized what it meant. "They know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan looked up, still catching his breath. "Who knows? What are you talking about?" Zavara turned to him, her expression grave. "The Caliph fleet. The energy surge sent out a signal, and now they'll come. An armada, not just a strike team. They won't stop until the core is recovered and all loose ends are eliminated." Ethan's face went pale. "You mean us?" She nodded solemnly, her gaze dropping to the core, its glow dimming but still pulsing faintly. "We don't have much time. They'll be here in less than an hour." Ethan stood, his mind racing. "Then we need to shut it down, or hide it. Or—" "It's too late for that," Zavara interrupted. "The signal has already reached them. They'll trace it here, and if they can't retrieve it, they'll destroy the entire area to ensure no one else can use it." Ethan's chest tightened at the thought. "There has to be a way to stop them. You said the core can stabilize energy systems. Can't we use it to overload their fleet, like we did with the strike team?" Zavara hesitated, her mind running through the possibilities. It's possible, but it would require direct interaction with their flagship. The core's range isn't strong enough from the ground. Ethan frowned. Then we take it to them. Zavara's eyes widened. You don't understand what you're saying. Their flagship is heavily armed. Even if we got close, they'd destroy us before we had a chance to deploy the core. Then we find a way to survive long enough to make it happen, Ethan said firmly. You said the core could save your people. If it can stop this fleet too, then it's worth the risk. Zavara stared at him, a mix of admiration and frustration in her eyes. You're willing to risk your life for this? For me? Ethan met her gaze. You risked everything to protect me. Now it's my turn. For a moment, Zavara couldn't speak. She had always believed humans were selfish, but Ethan was proving her wrong at every turn. Finally, she nodded. All right, there's one way we might be able to pull this off. My ship is cloaked nearby. It's fast enough to evade their initial defenses, but once we're aboard the flagship, we'll be vulnerable. Ethan grabbed a nearby backpack, stuffing it with tools and supplies. Then we'll just have to make sure they don't see us coming. Minutes later, they were racing through the forest toward Zavara's ship. It was sleek and angular, its surface shimmering faintly as it deactivated its cloaking field. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at its design. This is incredible, he said as they boarded. Zavara offered a faint smile. Let's hope it's enough. The ship lifted off, its engines humming softly. Zavara navigated with precision, her fingers flying over the controls. Ethan sat beside her, gripping the armrests tightly as the ground disappeared below them. As they broke through Earth's atmosphere, the Caliph fleet came into view. A vast armada of gleaming ships, their sheer size and number overwhelming. At the center was the flagship, a massive vessel bristling with weaponry. They've already begun scanning the area, Zavara said, her voice tense. They'll detect us soon. Ethan leaned forward. What's the plan? We'll use the core to generate a feedback loop in their systems, Zavara explained. It will disable their weapons and communication, but to activate it, someone has to stay behind and manually synchronize the core with their energy grid. Ethan's stomach dropped as he realized what she was saying. You mean, one of us has to stay on their ship? Zavara nodded, her expression unreadable. It's the only way. Once the synchronization starts, there's no time to escape. Ethan's voice hardened. Then we both stay. No, Zavara said firmly. You've already done more than enough. This is my mission. My responsibility. Ethan grabbed her arm, his eyes blazing with determination. And what about what you said earlier? That you wouldn't let them hurt me. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Zavara hesitated, her resolve wavering. She wanted to argue, to convince him to let her make the sacrifice. But the truth was, she didn't want to lose him either. The ship's alarm blared, snapping them back to the present. The flagship had locked onto them, its weapons powering up. We're out of time, Zavara said, her voice breaking. Ethan, please. You have to let me do this. Ethan reached into the backpack, pulling out a small device. You said the core could stabilize energy systems. Maybe it can stabilize us too. Zavara frowned. What are you talking about? I modified this transmitter, he explained. If we integrate it with the core, it might create a temporary shield strong enough to protect both of us during the synchronization process. Zavara stared at him, hope flickering in her eyes. It's risky. So is doing nothing, Ethan replied. She nodded, her decision made. Let's do it. As they approached the flagship, Zavara activated the transmitter and linked it to the core. The ship shuddered under enemy fire, but the shield held. They docked in a maintenance bay, slipping past the Caliph guards unnoticed. Inside the ship, they worked quickly to connect the core to the flagship's systems. Alarms blared, and the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. It's almost ready, Zavara said, her fingers flying over the controls. Ethan stood guard, clutching a makeshift weapon. Hurry. Finally, The core began to glow, its energy spreading through the ship. Zavara turned to Ethan, her voice soft. "Whatever happens, I'm glad I met you." "Don't say goodbye yet," he replied. A new hope. A blinding surge of light consumed the room as the energy core completed its synchronization. The Caliph guards froze in their tracks, their weapons faltering as the power of the core rippled through the flagship. Ethan and Zavara stood in the center of the maelstrom, the core's energy forming a protective barrier around them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Is it working?" he shouted over the deafening hum of the core. Zavara's eyes darted to the core's readings, her hands flying over the control panel. "Yes, but it's destabilizing faster than I anticipated. We have minutes at best before the entire system collapses." The ship trembled violently as the feedback loop expanded, disabling weapons and systems across the Caliph fleet. Sparks flew from the walls, and the lights flickered, plunging the room into a strobe-like chaos. The Caliph commander's voice echoed through the ship's comm system, cold and furious. "Zavara, you've doomed us all. Surrender now, and we may spare the human." Zavara ignored the threat, her focus unyielding. "The synchronization is complete. The fleet's weapons are offline, but we need to stabilize the core, or this ship, and possibly the planet, will be destroyed." Ethan grabbed her arm. "Then let's go. We'll figure it out together." Zavara hesitated, her resolve wavering as she looked into his eyes. She had faced countless missions and impossible odds, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the bond she had formed with a human she was once meant to eliminate. "No," she said softly. "You've already done enough. If you stay, you'll die." Ethan tightened his grip. "I told you, I'm not leaving without you." The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Reinforcements were closing in. Zavara's shield flickered, its power waning under the strain. The protective barrier around them was their only hope, but it wouldn't last long. "Fine," Zavara said, her voice breaking. "We'll use the escape pod in the docking bay. But first, we need to ensure the core's energy disperses safely." Together, they worked quickly, their movements synchronized as if they had done this 100 times. Ethan's hands trembled as he adjusted the core's parameters, while Zavara rerouted power from the ship's failing systems. The Caliph guards burst into the room, their faces grim with determination. They raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the core emitted another pulse, disarming them instantly. The guards fell back, retreating as the energy surge grew stronger. "The ship won't hold much longer," Zavara said, her voice urgent. "We need to leave now." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. Together, they sprinted through the crumbling corridors, the ship shaking violently around them. Explosions erupted in the distance, and the sound of tearing metal filled the air. As they reached the docking bay, Zavara activated the escape pod's hatch. "Get in," she ordered. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the chaos behind them. "What about the fleet? Will they recover?" Zavara shook her head. "Not in time. The core's feedback loop will disable them for weeks, maybe longer. It's enough to give my people a chance to reconsider their approach." They climbed into the escape pod, the hatch sealing behind them. Zavara took the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls. The pod launched just as the flagship's engines exploded, sending a shockwave through the void of space. Ethan and Zavara watched from the viewport as the flagship began to disintegrate, its once mighty form consumed by the energy they had unleashed. The remaining ships in the fleet drifted helplessly, their systems offline. Ethan exhaled, his chest tight with relief. "We did it." Zavara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "For now. But this isn't over. My people will come looking for answers, and when they do, they'll come for me." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "Then we'll face them together." She looked at him, her hardened exterior softening. "You'd do that? Risk everything for someone like me?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You risked everything for me. How could I do any less?" For the first time, Zavera allowed herself to feel hope, not just for her people, but for a future she had never dared to imagine. A future where trust, understanding, and love could bridge even the greatest divides. Epilogue. A message of unity. Weeks later, Ethan stood on a quiet hill, gazing at the stars. His lab had been repaired, and the energy core's technology was being studied for peaceful applications. But his thoughts were elsewhere, on Zavara. She had left Earth shortly after their escape, determined to return to her people and challenge the Council's rigid beliefs. Before she left, she had promised Ethan that this was not the end. As he looked up at the night sky, a faint shimmer caught his eye, a streak of light moving across the heavens. He smiled, his heart swelling with a mix of longing and determination. "She'll be back," he whispered to himself. "And when she is, the world will be ready."